monitor syphilis if left untreated. And so what would have happened though if participants were told, hey, there's a cure for your bad blood disease, right? Would you like it, right? Would they continue to be in the study because they're trying to help scientists see what would happen if syphilis is left untreated? They probably would not remain in the study, right? If there was a treatment available. That would probably not be a thing, or at least I would hope that they would want to take care of themselves and get better, right? So at that point, the act of withholding the information that a cure is available would definitely cloud their decision or their choices to remain in the study and not seek treatment. So deception is a very fine line. It's a Goldilocks rule. You don't want to use too much deception. Can you use deception? Yes, but in a limited way, okay? I'm going to skip this part. Let's talk about deception today. So typically speaking, now review boards are very, very, very cautious about deception. If you do choose to use deception, it has to be because what you're studying is very important, especially elaborate deception. And it has to be because there are no other procedures available. Most likely though, the review board is going to come back at you and say, I really don't like this, or I really would like it if you came up with something to counteract anything that can come from your study that would be negative. So that being said, now researchers are typically now going to focus on cognitive variables. We don't mess with deception as much. The ethical issues that can come with deception, and this should be not mythologies. Okay. Sorry, I've been meaning to correct that for a while. Every time I just verbally correct it. Okay, so the ethical issues that can come with deception has caused researchers to think of different methodologies not involving deception if possible, right? And the ethical issues being the long-term implications of mental health and how people are going to walk away from the study. Remember, the ultimate goal is that we learn something from other human beings or other animal subjects, but not at the expense of somebody's overall health and well-being. We want to promote psychology and behavioral science in an accurate and a healthy way. Okay, don't worry about this. Let's see here. If you want to take a picture of this, you can, and you can just use it. This is not an in-class activity for you guys. We're not doing that. But if you want, you can kind of answer the questions a little bit, okay? And that is available to you. All right, so debriefing. Debriefing is the opposite, right? It happens at the end of the study. So informed consent is at the end of the study, and informed consent is at the beginning of the study, and debriefing is going to be at the end. And I do ask you both of those questions on the exam. You're welcome. I just gave you 4 points. So if anybody misses those, I'm going to be really disappointed because I've literally just given you 2 questions that I asked. So please know when the debriefing process happens and when the informed consent process happens. Debriefing is at the end. The debriefing, what we do is we talk about the purpose of the study and anticipated results. So we reiterate the purpose, this is why you studied or you participated. It could be that in the informed consent process, we told you the general purpose of the study, but we may not have outlined it extremely to a T, right? So now we're going to do full disclosure. These were our variables, right? Anticipated results, what we expect to find. Do these findings or anticipated results reflect what prior research has found? You'd be amazed by how many participants are actually interested in what other research suggests and if we're expecting to find something similar. Next, if we use deception, we need to say what the deception was and why it was necessary that we use deception. We also want to talk about potential harmful effects due to participating in the study. So again, we're going to go over the potential risks of being in the study. And then lastly, I'm going to discuss any resources available to the participant. What resources am I talking about specifically? Resources could be access to a counseling center, a hotline, right? If I'm looking at risky behavior of any kind, I might say, look, here's a phone number to a suicide hotline, or counselors if you feel that you need to discuss the study with somebody outside of, our supervisor. You might give websites so people can read about what it is that you're studying. All of those things are available to participants, right? And so that way they don't feel like they're alone after the study. This is just a note on debriefing. So participants should leave the study without any negative feelings toward the field of psychology. That's extremely important and huge, right? We don't want anybody to walk away feeling disgruntled or in a way where they feel that we did not have their best interests at heart. We want them to feel positive. So that's all something to keep in mind. And then they should also leave with a better understanding of themselves. Obviously, this kind of depends a little bit more on the nature of the study. And it could be something where we, they're not going to leave with like a profound sense of self-identity or something like that from participating in the study, right? But maybe they learn something a little bit more about themselves. Maybe we're looking at music and how it affects studying methods, right? And so maybe they leave knowing like, okay, wow, that really helped me learn. So I'm going to listen to classical music when I study, right? It could be something as basic as that. The debriefing process should be educational, and it should provide ethical purpose. Debriefing should not be something where it's haphazardly done or whatever, right? Okay, so institutional review boards. This PowerPoint was a little bit backwards in the order, but basically before you can give informed consent, this is before informed consent, you have to submit a proposal to an institutional review board, okay? It is after you get approval from IRB that you can go and give informed consent, right? Part of the reason why I have informed consent listed first in this PowerPoint is because your informed consent form is something that you need to submit to IRB along with your application, right? That's part of the materials. So if an institution receives federal funds of any kind, it has to have an institutional review board. And an IRB includes at least 5 individuals, one of which is from outside of the institution, right? So Stan State receives federal funds. We have an institutional review board. In fact, we have several. The psychology department itself has an institutional review board. All faculty and student research has to be funneled through their first for approval before we can begin the informed consent process. So, and this includes humans and animal subjects, which I'm going to touch on here in a minute, but there's 2 separate review boards, okay? But right now, the one that we're talking about, IRB, is specifically for humans. And these guys are responsible for examining proposed research methods within the institution and ensuring that it abides by current ethical standards. Don't worry about this so much. Basically, what I'm just telling you is that this is not just at a school. If a hospital is conducting research, they have to have an institutional review board. It could be an internet company, community agencies. All of those have institutional review boards if they receive federal funding. Okay. Exempt research. So exempt research is research that poses no risk and does not have to have informed consent, okay? These type of research studies are studies that basically are already, what would you say, like public knowledge, public data. Archival research specifically is data that is already public information or participants that cannot be identified. So this might be an anonymous questionnaire, surveys, educational tests, naturalistic observation, right? Sitting in a park and just observing people walking by. You're not involving them in any way. You don't know any of their information, right? You can't contact them. You cannot track them down in any way. You don't know any personal information about them. That is all exempt research. Archival research is research in which public information or data is already available, right? Maybe you want to know about police reports, right? So I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but you guys are, every single time there's a shift change at the police department, they release police reports. And the police reports are a rundown of everything noteworthy that happened during their shift, right? If they did any extra surveillance calls or runs throughout an area, how many mental health health checks that they did, or well-being checks that they've done over a shift. So maybe you're looking at those, maybe you're looking at accident reports, or how many houses have sold in your area. Anything that is public knowledge falls under exempt research. Let's see here. Minimal risk research. So minimal risk is pretty popular. All of the studies that my students run in my upper division classes are all minimal risk research. These are risks of research that are no greater than what participants would encounter in their daily lives. Approval here by IRB is routine. We're not really concerned about elaborate safeguards, but we do have some safeguards that people, that we want to put up for people, right? Whether it's like last semester, I had a couple students who were looking at mood, and they had participants watch a slideshow video of something. And then we said, okay, what is your overall anxiety level now, right? And just in case that their anxiety levels were a little bit higher, or their self-esteem levels maybe were a little bit lower, or whatever, we had them answer a couple riddles, or maybe we had them say positive words of affirmation to themselves after. Those might be safeguards, right? So anything like that is going to be minimal risk research. How are we doing so far, you guys? Any questions, comments, concerns? Anything at all? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is greater than minimal risk research. Informed consent and other safeguards may be required before IRB grants approval. All of my students still provide informed consent and debriefing process to IRB. But basically there's a description of risks and benefits. We give exact wording. In fact, we even go a step further and I give IRB an informed consent form, right? How debriefing will take place, procedures for maintaining confidentiality. All of that is in your standard IRB form anyway, but greater than minimal risk research definitely 100% needs that in order to be granted. Okay, again, I'm going to kind of skip over this pretty quickly because I'm not going to be testing you and we're already running low on time. Okay, this is important though. Research, if long-term and or will be continued over a year, it has to be reviewed again. So every single time that you submit to IRB, if they approve your study, it is valid for 1 year from the time that you're granted approval. So if you are going to run a study again, or not again, but if the study goes longer than a year, then you have to resubmit, right? The other thing that is important to note is that once you submit to IRB and you get approval, it is not a free-for-all. If you make any changes to your procedures, you have to submit again to IRB and get a new approval form, okay? Any changes to the procedure require new review by the IRB, which is what I just said. So again, it's not a free-for-all. Just because you get approval once doesn't mean that you can conduct the study 50 years from now. Every single year you need to have a new approval, okay? All right, animal subjects. So I think that this is a very interesting subject. So let me preface this topic with, I know that some of you probably have very strong feelings using animal subjects. I am aware that this is kind of a controversial issue. Well, not kind of, it is. It's a controversial issue using animals for research. Let me say that I am not here to change your mind on animal use for research, okay? Probably if you have a firm opinion on it, there's nothing that I can say either direction that's going to change your mind in any way, okay? What I am going to do though is talk to you about animal use in research and talk to you about the safeguards that we put up for them and kind of the pros of using animals for research, okay? Common animals in research that are used include rats, mice, and birds. Researchers can, with the use of animal subjects, carefully control the environment. They can monitor them for 24 hours a day if needed, and study the same animals for a long period of time. Let me put this into perspective for you, okay? I was conducting my thesis using 4 experimentally naive birds, which means that they had never been in a study before, before the study had started. So our psychology department actually has a pigeon lab. And if you're interested in working with the pigeons, when we get back to a normal environment, there are a couple classes where you can actually work with the pigeons, okay? And grad school works with them too. But basically, the lab is on campus, and it's a pretty cool study, I think. But basically, for my thesis, I used 4 birds, and the experiment ran over the course of just about 3 months, okay? And I needed to be able to have the birds basically watch a computer program, and the computer program was set up to start with a black screen. And over the course of 24 hours, the screen would turn, or 12 hours, it just kind of depended. The screen would turn gradually from a black color to, let's say, the color red, for example, okay? And the whole point of this was that the computer screen was supposed to be similar to the sun, right? It's nighttime and then it's daytime, right? But basically they would watch this computer screen over the period of 12 or 24 hours. If you were a human subject, could I get you to sit down in front of a computer screen for 24 or 12 hours and say, okay, you're gonna watch this? And could I do that every single day for 3 months? Probably not, right? So in that case, using birds was kind of nice, right? And I can carefully control the environment, whether that be temperature. I can make sure that they're getting enough water. I can monitor how much food they're getting. All of that is carefully monitored. With working with animals, we use what we refer to as Okokokok. Okokokok is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. And this is the IRB for animals. And Okokokok is composed of at least 1 scientist, 1 vet, and 1 community member. And every single study that you conduct involving animal subjects has to go through your department's Okokokok board. And they are responsible for making sure that the study that you are about to run is not at all harmful for the studies, and what precautions you're going to put up to make sure that the animals are kept safe. So let me go back to my thesis for a second. In my thesis, we were depriving the animals of birds, and I say deprive lightly, okay? I don't mean that like they went weeks without food, okay? They always had access to water. but we might have not fed them for 12 hours or for 24 hours, depending on the condition that we were in. In this case, we were monitoring bird weight, okay? So let's say that a bird's free feeding weight, which is the weight that they are naturally at in their home cage with all of the other birds, let's say that it's like 700 grams, okay? What I'm going to do is say, okay, if a bird falls 80% at 80% or lower their free feeding weight, then they are no longer going to be in the study because it's not safe for them. So every single day that we went in the lab, we weighed them or right after we took them out to socialize with their other friends and right before we put them back in their cages, right? And that was all a safeguard. If it got close, like if we were getting close to their free or the 80% mark, then we would give supplemental feedings. That never happened, but we were prepared for that. And that was a safeguard that Ayacook was okay with. So we do very much care about the animals. They are very well cared for. There is a vet that the Pigeon Lab works with, and all of the birds that are in there are monitored daily what their weights are, and they're all given a good amount of food to live off of. In fact, one story that Dr. Potter tells often with the Pigeon Lab was one day a person went in and broke into the Pigeon Lab and left all of the doors to the cages open and the door open, right? It was an animal activist. They probably have about 30 birds in there, I would imagine. But basically, all of the birds, they came in the next morning to feed them, and not a single bird had left, you guys. All of the birds were sitting in the middle of the room waiting for somebody to bring them food. So they had hours to leave, and not one bird was lost and not one bird choose to leave. So they really did think that they had lost a bunch of birds, but they didn't. So anyway, that's just kind of a side story that I think is kind of interesting. So fraud. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. If data is fabricated, it puts the entire system of the scientific approach at risk, okay? So reports in journalism and science are two areas where it's assumed to be truthful. Okay, so that's a statement that your book gives. They talk about journalism being truthful. I think now more than ever, people are questioning journalists just a little bit more, and we question the biases a little bit more. So that second bullet point is something that your book offered. I'm not entirely convinced that I 100% agree with it, but I don't know, something to think about. So if data is fabricated, again, it puts the entire system of the scientific approach at risk, right? A good comparison that I can give you is I told you guys that I took an entire class just on ethics. And one thing that stuck with me a lot was the idea of cheating and plagiarism within the collegiate system, right? I don't know how many of you have thought to yourselves or heard someone else say, like, man, I just got to get through this class. I found all the answers on Quizlet, or I hired somebody to write a paper for me, or, I don't know, any of those different comments that suggest that plagiarism is at play or cheating is at play. And somebody is thinking like, okay, it's just for this class, or, it's just one test, or whatever the rationale is that they're using with it, right? Every single time that somebody cheats, it cheapens the system of the university. And every single time that someone does participates in that behavior, the system gets a little bit more weaker, and the degree that you're working toward becomes a little bit more fragile. So just like that, the same goes with the scientific approach. If we fabricate data, then what we're doing is we're saying that it's no longer objective, and we've decided to make our own judgments and our own claims, not based on the data. And that's going to put the entire scientific approach at risk and in jeopardy. So how is fraud detected? Well, one way that fraud is detected is through the replication process. So remember that the replication process is similar to a copy machine, right? So you put a study into the copy machine and we try to replicate it or produce it again as closely as possible. With the replication process, if somebody attempts to replicate the procedure or the study multiple times, and maybe several people have, and we don't get the same results, well, could that be fraud? I don't know. We're going to think about it a little bit more though, right? And then also, again, when identified by fellow research assistants or colleagues, right? So if cheating is happening, likely somebody is going to come forward and say, oh, this isn't quite right, and I need to report something that I'm aware of. Obviously, research assistants might be fearful of going against somebody who is of higher stature than them, but even still, with the environment that we're in, it's more likely that someone will speak up than not, right? So how often does fraud occur in the field of psychology? In short, not often, but why? First of all, we're aware of the replication process, right? So I'm not going to go out and say, hey, look, I found this really cool cure to cancer, right? And then somebody tries to do it again and we don't find it. And someone else tries to do it again and we don't find it. Again, that was a very extreme example, but we're aware of the fact that people are going to have access to our information and are going to try to replicate our study. Also, other people will read their reports. It's not like it's just going to sit there and it's just for us, right? We're going to share our findings with other people. Reputations and careers can be damaged, right? So it's not necessarily you, the person that committed fraud, their career is damaged. It's everyone involved with it too, right? So if one person is kind of a bad apple, it's going to ruin the entire bunch. So, and then lastly, data is now more accessible than before, okay? Why do people commit data fraud? The first is job pressure. There may be a need to produce significant results. There's an exaggerated fear of failure. I try to kind of mitigate that by telling students, okay, you may have put in a semester or a year or 2 years of your time into a study. And yeah, you've invested a lot of time and money into something, right? And I say money because a lot of times it's not free and there is a value on your time. Even if you don't find what you were hoping for, you still found something though. And maybe I'm saying this because my thesis didn't find what we intended it to find. In fact, in some areas, it appears to be the exact opposite of what we expected. But you know what we did find is we found what it wasn't. And while you can't get published with something where it wasn't, we did still learn from it. And another student did extend off of my thesis, right? So you're still providing knowledge to an area of psychology or an area of behavioral science that we may not have already understood. So this exaggerated fear of failure, it's really extreme, but I still think that you should still find something in nothing. And maybe that's kind of a half full approach, I don't know, but I encourage you all to look at it that way. And then a great need for success or significant data. So journals rarely, if ever, especially now, will produce or publish an article that has been not statistically significant. And so a lot of people feel the need in order to get published to have significant findings. So while that's true, you probably won't get published. You still need to find happiness in what you've done and success in what you've done, right? Next, this is more of going back to Principle E of the APA Ethics Code, respect. Disagreeing with someone's findings because differences in political, religious, or philosophical grounds does not mean fraud. And what I mean by that is just because you don't see eye to eye on a controversial issue does not mean that fraud has happened, okay? So also failure to replicate does not automatically mean fraud. It is possible that you did have findings unique to an individual. Maybe you had an anomaly, and that is possible. So even with differences, even with failure to replicate, you want to be really, really careful with making claims of fraud because it is extremely damaging to people's career and kind of their path within an institution. So we want to be really careful with it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak up if you suspect that something is happening. But what it does mean is that you want to be really careful about it. Plagiarism. So I don't want to worry about this because we're going to be talking about it in our first APA lecture. But in a nutshell, we went really, really fast and I apologize. I don't like going that fast. But that is our lecture for today. Any questions on any of this material or your exam?
I have a question. For the minimal risk, I was kind of confused between the minimal risk and the greater than minimal risk research. I just want to know like what was like the difference. I think I got confused, but
okay. So the main difference between the two is minimal risk is no more than your daily risk in like your everyday life, right? Where greater than minimal risk is risks that go beyond your daily risk of just like your day-to-day. Does that make sense?
yes.
Is there a guideline for those?
Oh wait, sorry, I missed that. What?
Is there a guideline for those? Like,
typically speaking, that's going to be up to the IRB, right?
Okay.
So, really though, I recommend just submitting everything you have to them in general, right? I recommend submitting an informed consent form. If you're going to have participants complete a task, you should be submitting all of that anyway, your debriefing form. If you submit all of it, then you're fine. I guess, okay, so greater than minimal risk, right? Let's say that, or let me start with minimal risk. Let's say that you're an athlete and every single day your workout consists of running 3 miles. That if I have you can run 3 miles in my study, that's minimal risk for you because you do that every single day. Greater than minimal risk would be like, okay, you run 3 miles every day, but for my study, I need you to run half a marathon, right? So that's more than what you do every day. The risk is higher for you to have issues maybe with your heart or the stress of it, your body being able to keep up with it. That's more than what you do every single day. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, great question. Other questions, you guys? All right, if you don't have any questions, then I will see you back here on Monday. Please do not forget to take your exam. You need to start it with enough time for you to finish it by 11 o'clock p.m. on Sunday, okay? And you only have 1 attempt. So email me with questions, comments, or concerns. I'll be here for you guys. No meeting on Wednesday though, okay? All right, bye guys.
Thank you.
No problem.